On this podcast, we love taking a closer look at parts of a business that might fly under the radar public perception, but are nonetheless integral to making it all work. Few company departments embody this quite as much as human resources, responsible for everything from payroll, talent management, employee benefits, training, compliance, workplace safety, and much more. So today, we're peeling back the curtain to talk with Jotform's own HR business partner, Matt Romond, to see what goes into running an HR department at a global tech company. Welcome to Momentum, a podcast by Jotform, where we talk about the technology, productivity tips, insights, and best practices that help us move forward in business and in life. Let's get started.
3, 2, 1, liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Maintaining momentum.
All right, welcome to the show. My name is Elliot, your host, and I am here today with Matt, who is Jotform's HR business partner. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So today, obviously, I want to talk to you about what you do, HR. It's one of the potentially the most important things at any company, and one of the things that people probably talk about the least, especially, if they're looking at a company or anything like that. But HR is really one of the backbones of any organization. So I think it would be great to get your perspective as an HR professional, just in general and specifically at a global tech company like Jotform. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty, I'd love just to learn a little bit more about you, your background, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been at Jotform for about a year now.
Mm-hmm.
It's been such a great experience. Prior to Jotform, I was with the same company for my entire career. Started with and my former company was not tech based,
Mm-hmm.
so it was an interesting transition going to tech. I started in a very frontline role and then worked up to a business operations and strategy role, and got really into the operations of the company. And going through that, typically what we talk about in business operations and strategy. For strategy, there's 3 parts of it. There's the strategic analysis, formulation, and implementation. And I, felt that going through that process at my old company, what tended to happen is that the analysis and the formulation was there, but ultimately the implementation is where things sort of fell apart a lot of times. I realized that's really a people thing.
For the HR processes.
For just business operations in general, which actually got me really interested in, implementation of strategic initiatives and business operations really revolves around, people and making
Absolutely.
sure that people have a say in what's happening and they can contribute their knowledge for their different functions. And that sort of opened the doors to HR for me.
Okay, so you weren't in HR at all. I don't think I caught that. That was just a completely side.
Yeah, interestingly, I transitioned at my old company from business operations to HR specifically for this sort of strategy reason, and got more involved in the HR and getting buy-in for larger group decisions, and that really opened the doors to my HR experience in general, and then took on more HR-related projects at my former company, and then ended up running HR for the company.
Sure.
So
okay.
it
Very
was
cool.
a really cool experience, and transitioning to Jotform was really fun and exciting. I've gotten to take a lot of the knowledge that I learned there and apply it over here as well.
Yeah,
and,
that's great.
Yeah.
And your realization that, it is about the people ultimately. I mean, human resources has human in the title, right?
Yeah.
What exactly drew you to that? Because I think I expected you to have gone to college for human resources, which is a common major, and then kind of came at it from the beginning from that angle. But you transitioned sort of mid-career almost. What I know you mentioned the people angle, but what really drew you to that? If you could expound more on why you turned to HR.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I was seeing in general. Business in general was group decision making and getting buy-in for really important initiatives in organizations, and understanding that the momentum that comes from getting people really excited about decisions and the trajectory of an organization's future or their future unleashes a a lot of positive energy that
Absolutely.
can help people individually and ultimately help the organization. So that was sort of an aha moment. And I started to look at HR as an opportunity to carry that out a little bit more. And the more I got into HR, the more I really liked the nuance of it, and the fact that in some respects it's really granular and very detail oriented.
Yes, anyone who's filled out HR documents can probably attest.
Yes. And then on the flip side, there's also a really global component that allows people in an HR position to interact with people in all different areas of the organization, which I found really, really exciting.
Absolutely. You probably get to talk or interact with more people at a company, at least on some level, than almost anyone else. I imagine, implementing and collecting documents and everything like that. So you probably have a pretty unique perspective in that role, I imagine, if you're attracted to that. Human resources, obviously, it's a broad term. It encompasses a lot. You may mention a couple of these things already. But I mean, everything from, well, I don't want to take words from your mouth. What does human resources, what does that encompass? Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
If you had to summarize.
In broad strokes, it's really helping individuals in the organization do their best work.
Okay.
That's at least from my perspective, and that takes a lot of forms. That's everything from understanding the compliance framework and like very basic HR frameworks to helping people grow and unleash their potential in terms of their management capabilities, their communication, their learning and development. So it really has a broad spectrum of touch points.
Yeah, I think this is a role where HR, a lot of departments at a company, or take engineering for example, I think of them sometimes as net positive, net neutral, net negative based on how they can actually impact an employee's time or user's time at the company. For instance, for support, I think in general, people who use support at a company, if they have a good experience with support, sure, that boosts their perceived value of the company. But if they have a perceived negative experience with support, that really, really downgrades.
Totally.
And similar with engineering, for instance, if you have a well-designed product, people just assume that's status quo. You don't really realize that. Bad engineering, it really, really downgrades. I was inclined initially to put human resources in that same category as engineering, where if human resources functions well, you don't really notice it. Yeah. But if it functions poorly, you really notice it. But what I'm getting to say is that I think there's a lot of net positive there, where if HR is functioning well, there's actually a huge net positive for people. Like you mentioned, it can actually energize them, give them more resources. It's not just this thing that you turn to if you have to fill out a form or if you have some kind of action that needs to be taken within the company. You can actually really help people. Yeah. So it's not invisible. Like I kind of initially thought it was, even hearing you talk about it preliminarily. Yes. All I have to say is, what are some of your primary responsibilities that can sort of enact that change? Like, sort of, what do you do on a daily basis, and how do you approach a day at Jotform?
Yeah. Sort of going to your point before, I actually think that that's sort of been an evolution of HR over the past 2 decades. Is before it was very much procedural, very much operational, where you kind of don't notice it until something breaks.
Correct.
But in the past, 2 decades, 15 years, especially the past 10 years, what's been happening is it's been very much more of a proactive approach to people teams and really helping individuals in the organization maximize their potential, right? So there is that underlying thing of overall making sure that, payroll is done, consistently, working with the finance team, making sure that there's the compliance documents. And then once that framework is in place, we start sort of looking at the employee experience and understanding the employee life cycle. Everything from recruiting to initial onboarding, somebody's first 3 months, how's their experience there, making sure that they feel welcome, making sure that they have the training that they need to do their job well. Once they get past that period and they're really working on understanding the organization and their role and increasing their performance in their role and feeling good about the work that they're doing, generating relationships in the organization, helping people understand what performance looks like and what their career next steps will be, is really, really important. And I think that's all to say that that doesn't necessarily have to be directly from HR. I think HR has a role in working with managers to help facilitate that growth. So to some extent, it is sort of behind the scenes still, but that's not to say that it's not actively working with managers, with team leads, to generate that positive momentum for the team members themselves.
Yeah, you're still taking that proactive step.
Yeah.
You don't just get the talent on board with the company, but you're still invested in actually fostering that talent, which wasn't something that I really realized until like I sort of became a manager myself and had interactions with you about that and everything. And I think that's really helpful. It's partly behind the scenes, but you're out there in some ways in the trenches and the front lines, making sure that people are happy and that they have that momentum, like you mentioned. So I think that's been awesome. What's something you do, just out of curiosity, that out of all the responsibilities that you have, that would surprise people to know that you do?
I think this is kind of the same for every role at Jotform. Like, I think that all team members really step in and do like all sorts of various tasks when needed, when needs to be filled. Like, for example, one of the things that I did last week was research particular type of screws that go in our conference table because we needed them. So like
probably wasn't in the original job description.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. That was one that was not in the original job description, but like that stuff that comes up that needs to be done, and I'm in the right place and the right time for it, so that type of stuff happens. So, and I don't think that's specific to me or an HR role. I really see that as everybody in the company sort of stepping in to fill those individual needs as they come up.
Even if it includes researching screws. Did
Exactly.
you find the right type of screw?
Yes.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. What kind was it?
They were cam pins.
Okay.
Actually, the ones that go in IKEA furniture.
Okay.
We needed a specific type of cam pin for our particular conference room desk that's similar to that sort of wedges everything together. But we found them, we got them, conference table assembled, so we're
All
happy.
right, we
have
won't
a
dive
place to
too
sit.
much into that, even though I'm somewhat interested in that. We'll keep it on HR.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an example of kind of the things that you step in to do. Given all the roles and responsibilities that your job kind of encompasses, from payroll, talent management, employee benefits, development, compliance, training, all that sort of stuff. How do you balance it all? Because that's kind of a lot. That's a big checklist that HR is responsible for. Like how do you approach managing that breadth of content that you're responsible for?
Yeah, I think so. First and foremost, I think just from a personal perspective, having everything documented, having everything in the calendar, having checklists and automated reminders is so important. But ultimately, even if we have our plan for the day, things are going to come up and we're going to have to shift. So it's really about understanding what's the priority on each initiative and allocating specific time for it. And if time gets eaten up by something else, being conscious of being able to shift and establish new priorities based on what's happening in a given day, week, or month. Yeah,
just kind of having prioritization and adaptability in that regard. How big is for perspective, how big is the team at Jotform? We're a few hundred people, the company as a whole. How big is the Jotform HR team?
Yeah, so we have between the HR and recruitment team, actually, just on the HR side, we're about one HR person per 100 employees, approximately.
Is that pretty standard for the industry? Okay.
Yeah. And that fluctuates a little bit, but as the organization grows, I think that the headcount grows, and then HR sort of comes in and fills in because our role can flex a little bit, which is nice.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. What would you say are some of the unique aspects or challenges of specifically being in an HR role at a global tech company like Jotform compared to potentially other industries?
Yeah, I think the fast-moving nature of the work always presents challenges, but also opportunities as well.
Sure.
Having a truly global team that's working, when we're asleep and vice versa, is one of the interesting things that I had to get used to. But ultimately, there's a cadence to it that actually can be harnessed to benefit everybody in the organization. So for instance, in the morning I'll come in and I'll check my correspondence from the team overseas and they'll be sort of at the end of the day when we're at the beginning of our day, and sort of check in on them, see what needs to be done to continue the momentum of stuff that they're working on over there. And then once that's done, they sort of log off. There's time for interactions with U.S. team members and team members sort of in the Western Hemisphere. And then the afternoon can kind of be put on projects.
Sure.
So it's interesting that, one of the things that initially can seem like a disadvantage actually can help structure our time to something that is advantageous.
Yeah, the fact that it's asynchronous for most of the day with just a little bit of overlap can actually help because you get some quiet time where you can just kind of focus on your own projects. I've felt that as well because obviously we have colleagues all over the world. How would you say, you touched on it a little bit in the way that HR takes some more proactive steps these days in fostering, momentum and talent and everything else. But to elaborate on that, how would you say HR has just in general, in that or other ways, most significantly evolved over the years? What's been some of the bigger transitions?
Yeah, I think that HR, and let me back up and say, I think that employees' expectations of what a company will give them has sort of changed over the years. So I think it used to be where, you would stay with the same organization for a long number of years, and if you were there, you put in your time, there would be promotions, and there would be a sense of stability and a sense of security for the long run, and that was, like 40 years ago. I think that has shifted a lot of ways in that team members and employees in every organization are not looking for the security that they were before necessarily. What they're looking for is personal growth opportunities. And that doesn't come necessarily from being in the same role throughout your entire career. That comes from experimenting, trying new things. And I think that companies that can offer that sort of flexibility in terms of, we know that you may not be here forever. We want you here forever. But if you're not going to be here forever, what we want to do is give you the best experience that allows you to get the most skills as possible in this time that you're with us. So it almost takes on more of a mentorship and growth idea. And I think that has been taken up by a lot of managers as well, where managers really understand now, hey, it's my job as your manager not just to tell you what to do. I want to work with you on the growth of you as a professional and understand what your career goals are long term and how I, in my role as your manager, can help facilitate that while also accomplishing what the organization needs to get done. So it's kind of a shifting, really unique relationship that's happened. And I think that the companies that attract the best talent and ultimately generate the best results have that mentality of growth and development in mind.
So that's really interesting. I didn't expect that answer. Kind of the shift from security to growth and advancement has been one of the biggest things that's actually impacted HR. Just rephrasing what you said and how you have to kind of adapt to that mentality. Out of curiosity, why do you think that is? What societally has changed where people used to crave security, now they crave growth?
Yeah, I think that it comes, and this trend I think was started a long time ago with larger organizations not being able to offer the security that they traditionally had. So, for instance, in terms of like pensions and lifetime advancements, things like that, and ultimately said, well, if that's not a benefit that these large organizations around the world can give, what are some ways that I can make sure that I'm a viable candidate for other opportunities that come up? And I think it really pushed people to upskill and continue to look for how they can professionally develop themselves over the course of their career, rather than saying, this is my spot, this is where I want to be, and I'm going to be in this role for my entire career. And I think that was also driven by the shift from manufacturing to technology.
Yep, I was just going to say that the tech boom must have had a play in that.
I think it to some extent it did. Now, I also think that Jotform is really unique in that we look for people with tenure that are not job hopping, that actually have that like cultivated sense of organizational awareness and have been able to navigate one organization for a long time. So that's actually an interesting thing where we differ is that, we're not necessarily looking for people that are shifting every year. We want somebody that has established tenure and shown that they've grown in one organization for a while.
Sure, and you phrase that well, I think. But to see a prospective candidate who has 3-5-year tenures on the resume as opposed to hopping around every year or so, maybe other employers wouldn't be deterred by that because that means they're ambitious or they have a drive for growth. But yeah, Jotform is very much, I can attest to that as a hiring manager myself, that we, especially executive leadership, very much like to see the long tenures. And it makes sense because there's something about the loyalty aspect, but also just being invested in the company just in general. I think it's nice to know that your employees are in it for the long haul. So retention is important. And it's probably a little bit scarcer in today's world where there are so many tech startups and different options, and there's less impetus, there's less reason to maybe stick around if you feel like you're stagnating. So that's a very interesting perspective. Thank you for sharing. And kind of diving into the tech aspect of that a little bit, how has technology impacted just your functions at your job? Like, how much of it is automated these days? How much are you actually stamping things on papers, shifting from one pile to the other? People have this stereotypical view of what an HR person does, but how much of that is accurate nowadays in the digital era?
Yeah, and I think this is probably true for not just HR, but most roles that are happening nowadays, especially in tech-forward companies. The goal is really to automate as much as possible. Mm-hmm. We want to take the things that are repeated processes and automate them so that we can free ourselves up for the deep thinking and the work that is truly human. And I think that is always the goal of especially HR, where we do have a lot of repeated processes. Building those processes so we don't have to necessarily focus on them, and then reserving a lot of thinking power and a lot of time for the nuanced cases that come up where we can actually exercise judgment and take appropriate action.
I'm putting you on the spot here. What would you say is an example of a nuanced case? It doesn't have to be a real life one, but what is nuance to you?
So for instance, let's say hypothetically we would have an employee who has a very specific need for extended leave that's not covered by the Family Medical Leave Act or something like that. We want to provide something that may be fair to other employees, but also flexible for this employee, and understanding what are the boundaries that we can do to make sure that everybody's satisfied without somebody saying, oh, this team member is actually getting unfair treatment. Why don't I get that?
Right.
So
it's a fine line.
Yeah. And to the extent possible, we always want to balance that flexibility and that fairness so that individual team members can get their needs met, but also we're not creating an expectation that's something that can happen for everybody.
Sure.
So understanding and sort of.
I imagine the larger the organization, kind of the more bureaucracy is involved in that, because it sets a bigger example. More people can potentially see that and are affected. So I'd assume that Jotform size, we're not tiny, but we're not huge. We're kind of right in that border where there's some room for flexibility, but we can't do everything. So it's probably an interesting space to be in.
Yeah. It's actually quite a fun space because also with an organization that's growing so fast, there are these policies that we have to continue to refine and grow because we're not a 10,000 person organization. It's not really set in stone and sort of coming up with, okay, what is the right thing to do in these specific circumstances? What makes individual employees feel like their needs are met, but also is fair to the organization and really the ecosystem that's, not just Jotform the company, but Jotform the employees and the team members and even the customers in the company, thinking about what's fair to everybody.
Right. And that can't be more important. Like I said, that's where you don't want HR to be the negative. That's the wrong example. But again, you're kind of molding it in a way because we're at that stage of growth. So that's got to be a cool position to be in. How do you think the field of HR will continue to evolve in the future? We've talked about technology, automation, but where do you think it's headed?
Yeah, and I think this may be framed by my previous education and experience coming from business operations and strategy. I think that biz ops and strategy is sort of it's becoming less centralized. It's going more to the people in the specific roles who are leading the specific roles to understand what the market is telling them. And I think with that, what tends to happen is a lot of the decisions are generated by data. right? So I think what happens from a strategy perspective is that HR team members are a little bit more involved in the decision making about how we facilitate communication among those different team members, so that they can sort of have that cross-functional knowledge of what's happening with marketing, what's happening with product, what's happening with the organization structure as a whole. And I think that is something that you're going to continue to see from HR, is sort of helping a facilitator of communication among the different parts of the organization.
Yeah, that's really interesting because normally you'd think that would fall to a certain executive or anything like that, but HR is already sort of doing that on a smaller scale by helping managers. How can you talk to your direct reports and stuff like that? So it makes sense. Helping teams. How do you talk to other teams and facilitate that conversation? So more of that proactivity, I think, which is really great to see.
Yeah, and especially in organizations that aren't super hierarchical. Executives have so much on their plate. And granted, like, communication is definitely a key priority for them, but to the extent that HR can help facilitate those communications and those communication channels, we want to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's been really revealing, I think, having this conversation with you, even for myself, and getting to hear about all these different perspectives that you bring to the table. And I was just thinking about that. It's like HR, it does sometimes have that almost negative association or stereotype where people are scared to be called into the HR office. They're scared to go up to the HR person. Every time you get an email from HR, it's like, oh, damn it, like another one. How do you go about breaking down that barrier where, no, HR is in your corner. It's here for good. We can help. To the average layman in a company who isn't a manager, like how do you get over that sort of hump of HR sometimes having a negative connotation when in reality it's the exact opposite?
Yeah. I think it actually comes down to the percentage of communications that are positive versus negative.
Yeah,
like
sense, totally.
any relationship, if the only time you hear from HR it's something negative, then that's going to be the connotation that's driving.
Absolutely.
But if you know the HR person, you have conversations with them on an ongoing basis, they help you out with different communications and problems that you're trying to solve. Then I think that the relationship is one of trust. And ultimately, this function can't really be effective without that trust. So I think it's really important that HR is involved in a lot of these things, not from a perspective of, well, this is what's in the best interest of the organization, but really, how can I help you as an individual contributor, as a manager, do your work better, or give you ideas, or help facilitate communication. So, the more positive interactions we can have with team members, the better off it's going to be.
Yeah, that's excellent advice, excellent perspective. Thank you for sharing. I think I might know the answer, but I'd like to hear it sort of in your words. Like, what is it that you find most rewarding about what you do?
Yeah, I actually think the individual communications with team members have been really rewarding, and then seeing how those sort of level up on a system-wide perspective has been really cool as well. So having different talks with managers about communications and how they can help their team members grow and develop, and get to the next place in their careers, and then sort of seeing that fulfilled months and years down the line is always really, really exciting.
Yeah, I imagine it must be. I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, you probably have more interactions with more people in a company than I'd say almost anyone, again, on some level. So to be able to see that sort of evolve has to be rewarding. How do you define success in HR? Like, yes, maybe there's metrics. So you make sure everyone signed their I-9 or whatever. But, for you personally, like, what does success look like in HR? When do you know you've done a good job?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that trust factor that you were talking about. In terms of metrics, I think that changes depending on the stage of the company.
Sure.
Obviously, a very new startup is going to have metrics around, recruitment and an applicant pool and getting people in to do the work. And very mature companies are going to have more success based on longevity, based on performance. But my personal metric is really just making sure that people feel comfortable with HR and see HR as an actual resource rather than a hindrance to their work.
Resource rather than hindrance. Yes, it's all in framing. It's all in marketing, as they say, marketing HR. Yeah, I mean, this has been really insightful. You know a lot about this topic. I think you live and breathe these principles that you were talking about. Just having worked with you for a year, what advice would you give to, let's say, other aspiring HR professionals who are looking to enter the industry, or people looking to maybe take their career to the next level, or thinking about transitioning to HR like you did? What would be if you had to distill it, what would be your advice to them?
Find a good mentor.
Okay.
I think just like any career field, I think that the people that you surround yourself early in your career will shape not only how well you do at it and your technique in your craft, but also your outlook on it. And I think that is just as important, having a positive outlook on your career and what you contribute as an individual, and what you bring to the table personally and professionally is really, really important. So find people that you respect, that you know do a good job, and ultimately are willing to help you grow.
That's great. Awesome. Conversely, from the other angle, if you're an organization who is looking to maybe establish an HR department or revamp it, what advice would you give them to start getting that in place?
Yeah. Find somebody who's really good with the details in the beginning.
Okay.
Somebody who's detail-oriented, who understands the concepts, understands the compliance frameworks, understands the policy and policy creation. I feel like it's harder to build that expectation in later on. It's
Right.
nice to start with this sort of framework and say, okay, here are the rules and regulations that as a company we have to follow, and sort of set that level ground, and then sort of build in a little bit more of the nuance into it as it grows. But I think that having somebody who's really knowledgeable about the specifics right off the bat is helpful. And obviously people who are personable too. Find somebody who has
underrated, but important. You got to have some of the soft
Yeah.
skills too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that combination. I think sometimes when people are hiring, they look for just the skills in terms of the technical capability, or they look for just the skills in terms of the people capabilities. Especially in this role, I think it's really important to balance both.
Excellent. Yeah. No, great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much for lending your perspective today. This has been really, really nice to hear. Peeling back the layers of what you do, how you think, and how HR really operates at a business. Before we leave, is there anything you kind of want to mention that we didn't cover today or leave on?
No, I think we covered a lot. I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate you having me on. This was great.
It was awesome to have you, Matt. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. We will catch you on the next episode.